So, what would you do if they put you in a zoo along with the monkeys?
Talk.
That's exactly what Otabenga did. He said, I'm a man, I'm a man.
The crowd laughed and clapped. They heckled and jeered, stood and gawked at the view. Some made lewd remarks and even threw some peanuts for the pygmy caged in a zoo.
Throughout history, human beings have always been fascinated by the world they live in. They have traveled, studied, researched, and recorded the flora and fauna around them. In 1859, Charles Darwin proposed a theory of evolution in his book, The Origin of Species. This new idea of evolution raised two big questions. Did man evolve from the apes? And if so, was there a missing link? The scientists said perhaps, the church disagreed, but researchers went on digging for more clues. Many Western thinkers began to conclude that some Central African tribals, like the Pygmies, were savages that resembled and acted like primitive primates in certain ways. Could these Pygmies be the missing link? And if they were, they must have been an inferior race.
Open ye gates, swing wide ye portals.
So meet me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the fair. Meet me at the fair.
The St. Louis World's Fair was organized on a 1,200-acre lot, which greeted a crowd of almost 200,000 people on opening day. The fair exposed the latest achievements in the arts, Olympics, sciences, and technology. Apart from featuring displays from 50 countries around the world, it also put on displays of actual people from other cultures like Native Americans, Filipinos, and primitive tribes from the Far East and Africa. This was to show and contrast the human development from the lowest to highest civilizations. That was mainly because it was the belief that the industrially far advanced Western civilization was comprised of a superior race. The St. Louis World's Fair had also commissioned Samuel Phillips Werner, a physician minister turned explorer, to bring a few pygmies for display at the expo. Otabenga was one of these Congolese males he brought from Central Africa to the United States.
How exactly Werner procured Otabenga remains a past mystery, because Werner would tell a different story each time he was asked. Was Otabenga bought from a native trader? Was he freed from the Belgian oppression? Or was he abducted from Africa? However, Otabenga's name has been recorded on a list of passengers in the logbook of a ship bound for America.
Benga was featured at an anthropology exhibit alongside the likes of Geronimo and other tribals.
I think man is a crazy animal.
Records show that as early as the 1850s, humans had actually been displayed in zoos with other animals in cities like Hamburg, Brussels, Barcelona, and Milan. The scholars pondered, could these pygmies be the bridge between man and the apes? At the World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri, Benga and others entertained the crowd with their tribal songs and dances. The public was made to believe that the performance was an Imbuti party or were cannibal rituals. The crowd curiously inspected these so-called savages by poking, pinching, teasing, throwing sticks, and even burning their hand with cigars. What is more is that the newspapers were full of sensationally offensive headlines, like "Pygmies disregard cash but rather settle for monkey food." One published report claimed that Benga must be a cannibal because he had sharp-filed teeth, despite the fact that Werner had published an article in 1902 that had already stated that these pygmies were not cannibals. Actually, tooth chipping was just a common ceremonial practice amongst that tribe, just like nose piercing or ear piercing or having a tattoo. When the World's Fair was over, Werner took Benga and other pygmies back to the Congo in Africa. It was here, reports say, that Benga got remarried, but his wife died shortly after. He was also treated like an outcast and scorned by his own people for being friends with white merchant traders who were considered dangerous. Having no more family bonds and community support, Benga's life was shattered. That's when Werner offered to take Benga back on a second trip to America in 1906.
Okay, did you know about Otabenga before?
No, I never heard of him. You know, I spent a lot of years in a zoo cage because I was cleaning the cage, and people would come and look at me.
What if you found yourself locked in a zoo and people were coming around and looking at you and kind of making fun of you, or just like, what's that? What would you do?
I would act like a monkey.
I'd probably hide and avoid the attention.
I suppose I'd be very unhappy with the situation, and I would escape.
Here in New York, Werner left Otabenga at the American Museum of Natural History, while Werner went back to St. Louis. But the living conditions at the museum did not suit Otabenga, who was getting tired and restless and tried to escape from the museum. Back home, however, Werner was in a difficult financial crisis and couldn't take care of Otabenga properly. So Werner made a deal with William Hornaday, who was the founding director of the Bronx Zoo, and to let the zoological gardens host and care for Benga for a while. And Hornaday agreed. At the start, Benga was allowed to freely roam around the zoo, helping feed other animals or running errands. But gradually, he was forced to spend more time near the monkey house. and finally he was caged with the primates in hopes that this would generate more income and publicity for the zoo, and it did. At first, Otabenga was very enthusiastic, jovial, and eager to please the curious crowds with his antics, natural charm, and persona. No wonder that he instantly became the main star attraction. The Bronx Zoo was packed with people who just wanted to have a glimpse of this strange creature. But for the ignorant public, he was just another spectacle. They ridiculed and mistreated him, feeling superior. So, slowly and surely, Otabenga was getting tired of their inhumane ways and was getting very depressed. To be displayed in a loincloth, even in the wintertime, for the public amusement, certainly did not make him or his stay comfortable. Perhaps the only solace Otabenga found was with his companion, who without any judgment or ridicule did seem to mutely understand him, his best friend, his pet chimpanzee. The story in the newspapers of this pygmy in the zoo raised a lot of publicity as well as controversies amongst African Americans, who asked if the display of Otabenga implied that all Africans were evolutionally inferior to Caucasians. They also protested against the display of a human being in the zoo with other monkeys. The mayor of the city took no action regarding this matter. Meanwhile, Otabenga was desperately trying to survive. He fought the obnoxious crowd who constantly probed, poked, groped, and continued to chide him. At times, he had to defend himself from their attacks by making a homemade bow and arrow. Protests grew day by day, and the zoo officials, feeling the public outrage from the black community, had to let Otabenga out of his cage. At this point, Werner was not in touch with Benga, and Benga had no idea of how to contact Werner. So Benga was handed over to Reverend Gordon, the man in charge of Howard's Colored Orphanage in Brooklyn, New York. Gordon's plan was to send Benga to a southern seminary to train him to be a missionary in Africa. In December of 1906, Benga was transferred to a theological seminary at Lynchburg, Virginia, under the care of Reverend Gregory Hayes. Unfortunately, Reverend Hayes died shortly after. Otabenga was now taken to a farm in St. James on Long Island, New York, to work and study at school. All Benga hoped for was to work and save enough money to buy a ticket on a passenger ship back to Africa. As events turned out, Benga somehow ended back at Lynchburg Seminary. Annie Bethel Spencer, one of the school's instructors, became a good friend and a mentor to Benga. Meanwhile, the widow of Reverend Hayes, Mary Hayes Allen, had remarried and was raising 7 children. She invited Benga to stay at their house for a while. For the children of Mary Hayes Allen, and also for the son of Annie Spencer, Otabenga became a father figure and a real-life hero. He would take them on many trips to the woods to gather blueberries, teach them how to spearfish, and hunt with a homemade bow and arrow. He would endlessly entertain them with stories of the forests, with a song and dance. The years slowly rolled by. Here too, As Otabenga once walked by a predominantly white community, he was yelled at and pelted with stones. He was confused. Such incidents brought back his bad experiences at St. Louis and at the Bronx Zoo, and must have triggered a trauma in his sensitive soul. He really longed to go back home to the Congo, and it had been 10 years since he had left his family, friends, and other animals in his native village, but he still did not have enough money for the journey. The First World War had started, which made the voyage back home more difficult and impossible. Otabenga's hopes were now becoming a distant, fading dream. It was nerve-wracking. It was the evening of the 19th of March, 1916. Otabenga built a small fire near the seminary. He danced around it and was singing and chanting, totally withdrawn and seriously lost in thoughts. Tragedies had struck him one after another, and he had had enough. Going back home was now a distant dream of hopelessness. Otabenga longed for the forests with nice people and the animals in the jungle, where there was peace and harmony, joy and warmth, singing and dancing with Mother Nature, as happy as one could be. Years on American soil had been a new and exciting experience, but it also had been one of sadness, cold, and loneliness, and of being an unwanted outsider. Depression, shame, anger, along with frustrations of life, slowly crept into Otabenga. No one to love or to be loved. He must have thought, what did I do wrong? Why did this happen to me? Late in the night, he went to a local grocery store and recovered a gun which was hidden there. It was perhaps a silent night, only to be shattered briefly by the sound of one single bullet. It was time to go home. Otabenga had had enough.